Hello, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel, Joe's Book and Movie Corner. And before you click off, if you only watch the first 30 seconds, I recommend, if you've never read Jane Austen, I recommend starting out with Northanger, Abbey. That is all. Goodbye. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure I got that out there. So today, yes, I will be talking about Northanger Abbey, which is what I read for Jane Austen July. This is another weekly reading report, so I'll talk about what I'm currently reading, what I finished reading this week, and then I want to, talk about some movies and TV shows that I watched. I'm mostly going to be focusing on two BookTube events. The first one, obviously, Jane Austen July. And then the next one is going to be BookTrek, which will then segue into the movies that I watched and shows. It's all Star Trek. I will put, since those are the two topics I want to cover are two very different topics, so I'll put timestamps down below about when I start talking about Jane Austen and then when I start talking about Star Trek. So feel free to skip ahead if that's, if you don't care about one or the other. But let's first talk about what I am currently reading. This is something I've mentioned before. I won't talk too much about it, but it's the Odyssey by Homer, translated by Robert Fagles. Last year I read the Iliad, so I'm reading the Odyssey out loud. I'm going through it very, very slowly. I'm only reading about 2 chapters a week, or 2 books a week. I'm enjoying it, but I think I liked the Iliad better. But I'm enjoying this well enough. So next, let's talk Jane Austen July. Of course, the book was Northanger Abbey. This is the third book that I've read by Jane Austen. First, I read Pride and Prejudice, which I liked. Then I read Emma, which I didn't really like that much. I had to force myself to finish it, but I can appreciate it. I can see why people like it. This is my third book. I wanted something a little bit lighter since I'm doing so many different BookTube events this summer. I wanted something lighter and easier, so I picked Northanger Abbey. This is the first book that Jane Austen wrote. It wasn't published until, I think, posthumously, if I'm not mistaken. And I really like this. So far, I think this is probably right now my favorite book that I've read by hers. And as I mentioned in the beginning, if you've never read Jane Austen before, or if you're interested in Jane Austen and you're wondering where to start, there's lots of BookTube videos recommending a reading order. Most of those recommendations, they start out with, you should read Pride and Prejudice first. And that's a fine place to start. I mean, there's only 6 novels, so you're probably okay starting anywhere, honestly. I wonder I don't think anyone's actually consciously doing this, but I wonder if they recommend Pride and Prejudice. One, because it's probably objectively the best Jane Austen book. Now, I can't attest to that. I haven't read them all. I would probably need to reread them to really come up with a real opinion. But a lot of people probably consider Pride and Prejudice the best. It's probably their favorite. And, if it's the best Jane Austen book and you only end up reading one, well, at least you read that one. I wonder if that's maybe a factor about why people recommend it first. It's also a very funny book, so it's easier to get into. Another factor people recommend Pride and Prejudice is readers are more likely to be familiar with the story. Now, I was not. I had no idea what the book was. I mean, I knew it was about a romance, but I had no idea what was going to happen in the plot when I picked it up. But I think those are the reasons why people recommend it. If you've never read Jane Austen, you're interested in not just reading one Jane Austen book, but all of them, I would actually start with this one, especially if you don't read a lot of classic literature. This, I think, is just an easier entry point, and I'll talk about why, but let me first say what it's about. It's the main character is Catherine Morland. She's spending some time away from her parents in the resort town of Bath, and the novel is split up into 2 halves. And the first half is mostly about her she's a teenage, I think she's 17 or 18 years old. She's navigating, kind of making new friends and juggling different friend groups and going to different social functions. Has a crush on a character. Another character has a crush on her. So it's just navigating these things in her teenage years. The second half of the book, and this is where the novel gets its name from, she kind of shifts friend groups from one to the other, and she goes to stay in this abbey. And that's when the book gets its reputation of, some people sell this book as a Gothic romance. This is Jane Austen's Gothic romance, and it's really not. There are chapters in the second half that satirize Gothic romance. and that's where the novel gets its name. Now, I actually find the Gothic romance satirization chapters, satirical chapters, I find them they actually kind of slow things down a little bit. That's actually probably my least favorite aspect of the book, and it also kind of overstates what the book is about. You go into it thinking, oh, it's going to be about this Abbey, it's going to be making fun of Gothic romance, and it's, you're almost 3/4 of the way through it before that even becomes a factor. Since we're talking about Gothic romance, I should mention I've never read, at least I can't remember if I've ever read Gothic romance. Anne Radcliffe is the author that's kind of specifically referenced. And I don't think you need to have read Gothic romance to understand when Jane Austen is poking fun of that genre. You know enough from Gothic romance through cultural osmosis to get the jokes and get that it's being funny. So that's one reason if you're worried, oh, I've never read Gothic romance, I'm not going to get the jokes. You will. You'll be fine, I think. The book is the romantic aspect, so it's about juvenile characters, younger characters. They might not have as much depth as other Jane Austen characters. The plot itself is a little bit more simple. And I think those are two reasons why this book is often regulated to like the latter half of a reading order. But I think it makes this book very, very relatable. I mean, we've all been young, and yes, we don't have as much depth. We're not as interesting people as when we're younger and more sophomoric. But these kind of juvenile romance chapters, they're very relatable. The situations that Catherine gets herself in is very childish but very relatable. For example, there's a chapter or there's an episode where her attention is being split between these two groups, and she's arguing with one group saying, hey, I made a commitment to go do this thing, and you're saying, no, screw them, come with me. And it's way too much effort and concern is being put on this, the competing interests between the two groups. And that is very, very relatable. And also, we've all been in very shallow crushes. There's a male character, too, that Henry, the love interest, Henry, he's kind of a jerk to Catherine. He speaks down to her. Catherine's kind of an airhead. And he's kind of rude. And I would say that's also very relatable. When you're young and you're kind of, trying to figure out the opposite sex, I feel like with Henry, there's like when you're younger, there's, if you're a boy, I don't like girls, and girls, I don't like boys. And then you start to like girls and you start to like boys. But some of that kind of childish teasing or that childish divide between boys and girls sort of remains, and you don't know when teasing becomes a little bit too much. So a lot of people don't like the character of Henry, but I found him to be kind of very true and relatable. And this book, it's such an easy entry point. It's just a little bit easier to read. It's very funny. And it also shows that this alien world of the Regency period England is, despite being very different, it's extremely relatable. Even if the specific situations they're in and the social functions are different, we can see parallels to modern life. It actually reminds me of the Japanese director Yasujiro Ozu. And if you don't know who that is, he was a Japanese director that made films from the silent era to the 1960s. And his movies originally were not ported over to the West. And his movies were seen as, they're too Japanese to be relatable to a Western audience. They're about the stories. Once he developed his style, his stories are about arranged marriages and intergenerational conflict and conflicts within a marriage. There's a lot of comedy sprinkled throughout. The stories are often very quiet, very similar from one movie to the next. And then by the end, there's usually a big emotional gut punch in the end. And it's a shame that those movies didn't come over to the West sooner, because despite being very Japanese and on the surface they're very alien, it's a very different culture, they're extremely relatable. And I find it's the same way with Jane Austen. Obviously, we don't live in the Regency period was very different, but these characters, they're still human beings. And it shows me that Jane Austen was a genius for creating characters that were believable and are alive with life. And they're very true to actual human nature. So Jane Austen understood people very, very well. And there's also, obviously I'm a male reader. I'm not, I think the way Jane Austen is marketed now is towards women as romance novels. Claudia at Spinster's Library made a great video about Jane Austen for men, and she kind of mentions that a lot of male readers who discover Jane Austen, they have to kind of give an excuse as to why you would read Jane Austen, and you use it as like a life lessons manual after you've read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And while it's true, there are, I like to underline Jane Austen books, and she'll hit you with these life truths. So yes, there is some truth to that, I think, but you don't need an excuse to enjoy these books as if you're a male reader. You can just enjoy them because they're just so true to life, and they're also really funny and witty. And I should mention the narrator in this book is very witty. She lays down these sick burns. She's sometimes kind of brutal to her characters, and she's not very nice to her characters occasionally. And another aspect of the book that's just this particular novel that's really fun is the kind of meta nature. There's a chapter where the narrator stops the plot just to talk about novels and reading, and she mentions how male readers often don't read novels. And again, it's still relatable to this day. So I highly recommend it if you've never read Jane Austen and you're new to classic literature. I would recommend Northanger Abbey. It's really good. Next up, before we talk about BookTrek, I want to briefly talk about my read this week for Rocket Summer. This was week 4 in Rocket Summer, where you read books from the 1960s. I was not able to fit a novel in, but I did read a short story. On Project Gutenberg, I found The Snowbank Orbit by Fritz Leiber. Anyway, no matter how you pronounce it, this is an author that I'm going to be looking out for in the future. It was a short story about humanity has spread throughout the solar system, and there is a alien race that is making war with humanity within the solar system. Not much is known about this alien race. It's kind of creepy. I feel like the last few paragraphs, or the last little section of the story where the true nature of these aliens was revealed, was not quite as interesting as the more mysterious earlier sections of their story. I don't really have too much more to say about it. It's free on Project Gutenberg. I recommend it. There's also there's an aspect to this story where a lot of attention is given to slowing down around the planet Uranus. They're doing like an aerobraking technique, and a lot of attention is given to the fact that that's going to cause gravity due to acceleration. And that reminded me of Joe Hadelman's The Forever War. So details like that are really kind of hard sci-fi details are a lot of fun, and I like reading about stuff like that. But that's it for Rocket Summer. I don't think I'm going to be able to squeeze in another book in this final kind of fifth week. But coming up into August, of course, I'm going to read something for Garb August, probably something by Richard Lehman. There's going to be a lot of science fiction. So if you're here for Rocket Summer, stay tuned, because I'm going to be reading a lot of sci-fi, also a lot of shorter, older fantasy, a lot of sword and sorcery, I think. But let's talk about BookTrek. So I haven't finished anything this week. Last week I read Strangers from the Sky. This week I am currently reading, I'm about halfway through it, I'm reading Imzadi by Peter David, who just passed away this year. I'm reading this with in a group reads created by Brandy from the book at the Book Collectic. So thank you to Brandy for setting that up. And this is a book that I started to read a long time ago, and I never finished it. So I'm happy that I'm finishing it now. Overall, I have to say, even though I am enjoying it, I think it's a bit overrated. This is a book that is often recommended when you look online for what's a good older Star Trek, standalone older Star Trek novel. This one is always recommended, and Peter David, as an author, is always highly recommended. And so far, I think it's a bit overrated. I think it's probably not helped by the fact that I just read a Jane Austen book before this. This is also a romantic story. And like Strangers from the Sky, it has to deal with it's dealing with several different timelines, kind of converging together. One aspect that I'm not really enjoying, and this is in contrast with Strangers from the Sky. In that book, there was many different timelines, but you could make predictions on where they were going to converge. And I find that satisfying. You can make predictions about how things are going to come together. Maybe you'll be wrong. Maybe your expectations will be subverted. There's 3 different timelines in this book. There's future, what we'll call the present. It's taking place at some point during the run of TNG. And then there's a timeline that's taking place before the events of the show, when we see the romance between Deanna Troi and William T. Riker kind of beginning and starting. I can see how the future and the present are connected. There is an aspect of the past that I know is somehow involved. There's an alien race that shows up in the present timeline that's also in the past. But I can't really make a prediction with how the past is going to connect to the present and the future. And I'm halfway through the book. I mean, I think probably tonight, after I read just maybe a few more chapters, I will start to get some idea how it's connected. But for a lot of the romantic chapters, it feels just separated from the rest of the book. And we spend a lot of time, once we get to the past, a lot of time on the romance, or the budding romance. And that's another problem that I have with the book. Again, and this is not helped by the fact that I read a juvenile romance by Jane Austen, who's an excellent, amazing, genius writer. It's very... the characters don't quite feel like themselves, which is, not too bad. They're younger versions, but it feels like they're much younger than they actually are. They feel like teenagers. And the book feels like it was written for a young adult audience. And I'm not a big young adult reader. It feels very juvenile, and not in a good way. I'm using that word a lot this video. So it just doesn't feel true to their characters, and Deanna Troi especially. I don't know if she would act the way she's acting. Anyway, I won't ramble on too long about it, but overall, I'm finding it not quite matching up to its reputation. I'm hoping that will change by the end of it. Some action has started to happen in the earliest part of the timeline of the book. And you can see on the cover here, I don't know if you can make that out, there is the Guardian of Forever, and that's an aspect, or that's alien device that was in the original series. So that's something that's very, very cool. And I'm excited to see how the Guardian of Forever is going to play a part in kind of solving the main issue of the novel. So I'm glad I'm reading it now. I am enjoying it, but Peter David, I'd like to read more by him, but I'm worried that I'm just going to find him a bit overrated. But we'll see. So that's it for what I've read, what I'm currently reading. I won't give a big TBR this week. I'm just going to let you know I'm going to continue reading this, and we'll see what happens from there. Before I talk about this is the movie I watched, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I do want to mention I did finish the first season of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. I thought it was excellent. I talked about it more in my previous video, but I recommend it. Watch it. Don't go into it looking for things to nitpick. You'll find them. If you're looking for things to nitpick, you will find it, and you will hate it, and you will just... unless you want to get off on hatred, don't do that. just enjoy it. It has overall... Strange New Worlds has a lighter tone, but it shows the strength of episodic storytelling. It's a lighter tone overall, but it can also have a horror episode, and it can have a very action-heavy episode. I think it's really good. I'm really excited to watch Season 2. And I know that Season 2, and there's an episode that I know is coming up in Season 3. At the time of making this video, Season 3 is airing. I know that there's going to be some heavy experimentation. I think there's a lot of influence from the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's a show that I've never watched. But I'm excited to see what they do with it. I'm open to experimentation as long as I get episodic storytelling. If sometimes they go a little too far and I don't like it, that's okay. Overall, I'm still enjoying the show. So let's talk about the movie that I watched. In our group discussion on Strangers from the Sky, we got sidetracked and talked a lot about Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So that's what I watched. This is the newer Blu-ray from 2022. Yeah, 2022. This is the director's edition, which if you've never seen this movie, I would encourage seeking out the director's cut. Even though it's a few minutes longer, it's the pacing is tighter. And I've made a video before on this subject, so I'll post a link to it up in the corner somewhere. So I encourage you to watch that. So I won't spend too long talking about why I like it, but basically I like that it has a 2001: A Space Odyssey influence. I came to Star Trek through The Next Generation as well as through the original series movies. I was not a fan of the original series as a little kid. So I don't have... I kind of came to this more just open. Like, it didn't bother me that Kirk is a jerk and Spock isn't acting like his normal self. There's an aspect to this movie that some people probably don't like. There's a getting the band back together aspect. This is a few years after the end of the 5-year mission. It's not helped by the fact that the movie was shot 10 years after the show, so that the characters have aged. The actors have just aged way too much than what they should look like. And this getting the band back together aspect is very similar to what I talked about either last video or a couple of videos ago when I watched Star Trek 09 and Star Trek Into Darkness. In prequels and reboots, we're not getting the band back together. You're forming the band for the first time. And sometimes that's going to be fun to watch, but sometimes that's not quite satisfying. And the reason being is because in Star Trek 09, the characters are not the characters that we know and love. And they finally become the characters at the very end of the movie, and then the credits are rolling. And then you get to Star Trek Into Darkness, and you're thinking, okay, now these should be the characters from the original series. But they're not. They're still forming. They're still their younger versions. I mentioned James Bond is a really good example, the Daniel Craig James Bond movies. Casino Royale is a great movie. It is excellent. It is a perfect jumping on point if you're getting into James Bond. But as a long-term James Bond fan, even though I love the movie, by the end I was like, okay, next movie, we're just going to get a normal adventure. And then the next movie, Quantum of Solace, which is actually kind of underrated, I think. He's still not the James Bond we know and love. It's a direct sequel. The character is still forming. Okay, end of that movie, third movie, Skyfall. Now it's the James Bond way. Nope, now he's for some reason, somehow this grizzled old agent that's a little out of touch and over the hill. What's going on? But then by the end of it, now he's the agent that we know and love. And we have the new M and a cushiony door. And the flow of those movies doesn't make sense. So, end of the third movie. Finally, we have James Bond. And then the fourth movie, Spectre, just plain sucks. So, all that build up to just kind of a letdown of a fourth movie. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. That can be frustrating. However, in the third act of this movie, you do get the trio is formed. Spock is back to his normal self. Kirk has softened, and he's more like his original series self. There is an addition to the trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, Commander or Captain Commander Decker. His relationship, by the third act, Kirk and Decker have kind of reconciled, and now they can work together. There's a few lines of dialogue where they make a metaphor about having a poker hand and bluffing and having a weak hand, and you can tell they're now on the same page and they're working together. So he's joined the trio. And I find that really satisfying, and it happens before you get to the end credits. So a lot of people have that complaint. I don't find it's warranted, but that's probably because I didn't grow up with the original series. This is my introduction to the original cast. So I highly recommend it. If this Blu-ray is out there, if you if you haven't seen Star Trek the Motion Picture in a long time and you've never really liked it, give it another watch. Approach it with some fresh eyes. It's more deliberately paced. Watch the director's cut. It speeds things up a little bit. Yeah, and just enjoy the music. That long scene that everyone complains about, it's only 5 minutes long. Everyone say it's 20 minutes about floating around the spaceship. It's not that long. Just enjoy the music, enjoy the models. It's great. So I really love this movie. I encourage you to check out my other video if you want to hear me go into even more depth about why I like Star Trek the Motion Picture. So that's all for now. Like I said, this week I'll be reading Imzadi. I'll probably read something else, maybe something shorter for next week. But that is all for now. Thank you.